Margaret sat in the corner of a small roadside diner, a quiet place nestled between two stretches of open highway. The morning sun filtered through the dusty windows, casting long, warm streaks of light across the wooden tables. She sipped her coffee slowly, savoring the bitterness and warmth. It had become a small comfort to her, a simple routine that reminded her life still had small joys. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the cup. Margaret was an elderly woman, her hair silver and neatly tied back in a bun, her face lined with years of laughter, sorrow, and hard work. The diner around her was alive with the soft hum of conversation, the clatter of plates, and the occasional burst of laughter. Families sat together, young couples whispered to each other, and travelers hurried in and out, eager to grab a quick meal. Yet, Margaret felt invisible. She wasn't used to feeling frightened. Most of her life, she had been independent, traveling alone, taking long walks in parks, visiting friends, and volunteering at the local library. But in recent weeks, something had changed. She had sensed someone following her. At first, it was subtle, a shadow behind her at the grocery store, a car parked near her house for too long, but now, the feeling of being watched had grown into a persistent worry that gnawed at her. Margaret folded a napkin into a small, precise triangle and pressed it lightly against the edge of the table. It was a simple gesture, almost unnoticeable, yet it was a signal. She had learned it long ago, a quiet way to call for help when speaking out loud might be too dangerous. She glanced around the diner, her eyes cautious, scanning each face, hoping that someone would notice, someone who understood. Across the room, John, a U.S. Marine recently returned from deployment, entered the diner. His boots clicked against the wooden floor, and his presence immediately commanded attention without needing words. John was in his early 30s, tall, and well-built, with short brown hair and sharp eyes that missed very little. He carried himself with a quiet confidence, a man used to observing his surroundings and reading situations before acting. At his side, Rex, his German shepherd, padded silently. The dog's dark eyes mirrored John's alertness, moving constantly, assessing the environment. John had always been sensitive to danger, trained to notice subtle changes in behavior or atmosphere. As he scanned the diner, something unusual caught his attention. A woman in the corner, her posture rigid, her hands trembling slightly, and her fingers pressing against a napkin folded into a small triangle. It was subtle, but to John, it spoke volumes. He walked toward her table slowly, keeping his movements non-threatening. Rex stayed close, his ears perked up and his gaze fixed on Margaret, sensing the tension before even knowing its cause. "Good morning, ma'am," John said in a calm, reassuring voice. "Mind if I join you for a moment?" Margaret looked up, startled. She had expected to go unnoticed. She hesitated, unsure if this man was someone she could trust, but something in his eyes told her he was different. He didn't rush, didn't demand, and didn't appear impatient. Finally, she nodded slightly. Yes, you may," she whispered, her voice trembling. John pulled out a chair and sat down, keeping a polite distance. Rex lay down at his feet but remained alert, his gaze flicking between Margaret and the door. "I'm John," he said simply. "This is Rex. You seem uneasy. Is everything okay?" Margaret swallowed hard, debating whether to speak. Fear and embarrassment warred with her need for help. She wanted to remain composed, but the truth pressed against her chest like a heavy weight. I think someone is following me," she admitted quietly. "I've noticed cars behind me, sometimes in parking lots, and even near my home." I don't know why, but I've been afraid to go anywhere alone. John nodded, listening carefully. He didn't interrupt or dismiss her concern. You're safe here, he said firmly. No one is going to harm you while you're in this diner. Tell me everything you've noticed. Margaret took a deep breath and began recounting the events over the past 2 weeks. The man in the dark sedan who seemed to appear wherever she went, the feeling of eyes on her back when she walked to the mailbox, the unease that had begun to make even her own home feel unsafe. As she spoke, her hands trembled less, and a small sense of relief began to surface. Speaking to someone who listened, who believed her, was a comfort she hadn't realized she needed so badly. Rex shifted slightly, letting out a soft, low growl not at Margaret, but at the thought of the stranger she described. John noticed immediately and placed a hand lightly on Rex's head, silently communicating calm but vigilance. We'll figure this out, John reassured her. You're not alone anymore. I'll stay with you until we can make sure everything is safe. Margaret felt tears prick the corners of her eyes. She had faced challenges in her life, losing loved ones, moving to new towns, enduring illness, but the fear she felt in the last few weeks had been unlike anything else. For the first time in days, she felt that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't entirely powerless. The diner's waitress approached, smiling warmly. Can I get you more coffee, ma'am? She asked. Margaret nodded, grateful for the distraction. As the waitress poured another cup, John subtly scanned the room again, noting the entrances and exits, the few patrons who came and went, and the cars parked outside. Every detail mattered, and John had learned to trust his instincts. Something about Margaret's situation was urgent, and he would not let it go unnoticed. Margaret finished her coffee slowly, savoring the warmth. She glanced at the door and then back at John and Rex. I don't want to be a burden, she said softly. You're not a burden, John replied firmly. As a Marine, I've learned that sometimes people need help, and if you're in danger, it's our responsibility to act. That's all there is to it. Margaret looked at Rex, who wagged his tail slightly, his dark eyes reflecting trust and protection. She felt an unfamiliar but comforting sense of security, like a shield had been placed around her. She still felt fear, but it was no longer paralyzing. With John and Rex by her side, she had allies she could trust. The morning passed quietly in the diner. Margaret shared fragments of her life stories from her youth, memories of travels, and small anecdotes that brought a smile to her lips. John listened attentively, sometimes interjecting with questions or light humor, carefully balancing professionalism with warmth. Rex rested near Margaret's feet, occasionally nudging her gently with his nose, as if encouraging her to relax. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting brighter light through the diner's windows, a strange sense of hope began to blossom in Margaret's heart. The world outside was unpredictable and sometimes frightening, but she had discovered that even in unexpected places, there were people who would notice, people who would act when words weren't enough. John watched her carefully, understanding the power of small gestures. The napkin folded into a triangle, the quiet SOS had been the catalyst that brought them together. It was subtle, almost invisible, yet it had communicated a cry for help more loudly than any words could. He made a mental note, sometimes the simplest signals carried the most profound meanings. By the time Margaret left the diner that morning, she felt a mix of apprehension and reassurance. The world outside was still full of uncertainty, but she had allies now, people who would stand with her, watch over her, and help her navigate whatever came next. John and Rex would not let her face her fears alone. As she stepped into the sunlight, Margaret paused to glance back at the diner, a small, genuine smile crossing her face. She had sent a quiet signal, one that many might have missed, but it had been seen. And sometimes, being seen made all the difference in the world. With that thought, she took a deep breath, feeling the warmth of the sun on her face and the faint echo of hope in her chest. She didn't know what the coming days would hold, but for the first time in a long while, she felt that she could face them not alone, not afraid, and not silent. Margaret walked slowly to her car, her hand gripping the steering wheel as though it were a lifeline. The diner's bell jingled behind her as John and Rex stepped outside. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of wet earth and pine from nearby woods. Birds chirped softly, completely unaware of the tension that hung around the little roadside diner. "Are you sure you're okay to drive?" John asked gently, standing beside her car with Rex at his side. His eyes, sharp and attentive, scanned the road ahead, as if trying to detect danger that had not yet revealed itself. Margaret swallowed, her throat tight. "I think so," she said softly. "I've done this 1,000 times before. I can manage." Her voice was steady, but her hands shook slightly on the steering wheel. John didn't push her. Instead, he said calmly, "All right. Let's take it slow. I'll follow behind, and Rex and I will make sure you get home safely." Rex let out a soft bark, almost like an agreement, and Margaret felt a strange comfort in the presence of the two of them. It had been so long since she felt truly safe. Driving alone had become a source of anxiety lately. The shadows of someone watching her had made even short trips stressful. But now, she felt a little of that anxiety lift, replaced with cautious hope. The drive started quietly. Margaret's hands gripped the steering wheel a little less tightly as she focused on the road. She followed the familiar path home, through winding country roads and stretches of open fields. John trailed behind in his car, keeping a careful distance to avoid alarming Margaret while remaining close enough to intervene if necessary. Rex sat alert in the passenger seat, occasionally resting his head on John's knee, his eyes scanning every movement outside. For the first few miles, everything seemed calm. Margaret exhaled, telling herself that perhaps she had been imagining things. Maybe the cars that followed her before were coincidences. Maybe the fear had been magnified by loneliness. But even as she tried to calm herself, a faint unease lingered at the back of her mind, reminding her to stay alert. John, however, remained focused. He noticed a dark sedan that appeared in the distance behind Margaret's car. It wasn't moving aggressively, but its presence made him uneasy. John adjusted his rearview mirror, observing the car's movement. He had seen this behavior before, a vehicle appearing at multiple locations, always in a way that seemed deliberate rather than accidental. His instincts told him to act, but he needed to keep Margaret calm. He called out softly over the radio to his own car, "Rex, stay alert," and felt the dog tense immediately. Margaret glanced in her rearview mirror and noticed the sedan. Her heart skipped a beat. "They're following me again," she whispered, her voice tight with fear. John didn't panic. "All right, Margaret. Stay calm. I've got you. We're going to take a side road, a safer route back home. Follow my instructions, and everything will be okay." Margaret nodded, trusting John's calm authority. She had no idea what he was planning, but she sensed that he knew exactly what he was doing. The confidence in his voice and the protective presence of Rex reassured her more than she could explain. The side road was narrow and winding, lined with tall trees whose branches created a natural canopy above. Sunlight filtered through the leaves in scattered patches, painting the asphalt with shifting patterns of light and shadow. The sedan followed, slowly at first, but John noticed that it adjusted its speed to mirror Margaret's. Whoever was in that car knew her route. That realization tightened the knot of fear in Margaret's chest, but John kept his voice steady. "Keep going straight," he instructed. "Don't speed up or slow down too much. Just follow the turns." Margaret obeyed, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. She was aware of every sound: the rustle of leaves, the distant crow of a rooster, the faint hum of her engine, but most of all, she was aware of the dark sedan behind her. Each mile felt like an eternity, yet John remained composed, giving her a sense of control she hadn't felt in days. Finally, John saw an opportunity. A small, gravel driveway led off the main road, lined by tall hedges and partially hidden from view. "Turn here," he instructed calmly. Margaret followed, carefully maneuvering the car onto the driveway. The sedan continued down the main road, slowing slightly as it lost sight of her. Margaret exhaled deeply, feeling the tension in her body ease slightly. Did we lose them?" she asked, her voice tentative. John nodded. "For now. But we need to be careful. They might come back, so we'll make sure your home is safe before you go inside." Rex barked softly, sensing the change in the air, and Margaret smiled faintly at the dog. His instincts were remarkable, and she felt grateful that John had brought him along. She realized that she wasn't just being protected physically, but also emotionally. The presence of someone who cared, someone who would act when danger approached, made her feel braver than she had in weeks. The rest of the day passed in a cautious rhythm. John helped Margaret secure her home, checking locks, ensuring windows were closed, and even advising her on simple ways to make the house less noticeable to strangers. Margaret listened carefully, absorbing every piece of advice. She had lived alone for years, but the vulnerability she had recently experienced had shown her the importance of being prepared. As the afternoon sun dipped lower, casting a golden glow over her living room, Margaret and John sat quietly, sharing small stories about their lives. Margaret spoke of her youth, the adventures she had embarked on, and the friends she had made along the way. John shared his experiences in the Marines, carefully choosing words that conveyed both his pride and the lessons he had learned about trust, courage, and vigilance. Rex lay at Margaret's feet, occasionally nudging her hand with his nose, as if to say that everything would be all right. Margaret laughed softly, a sound she hadn't realized she missed so much. The laughter was light, freeing, a reminder that even in fear, there could be moments of joy and connection. Margaret's phone rang suddenly, startling her. She hesitated, then answered. It was the local sheriff. "Margaret, we've received reports of someone in the area who matches the description you gave us. Can you come in and provide more details?" Margaret felt a mix of relief and apprehension. "Yes," she said, her voice steady. "I'll come in." John nodded, offering a reassuring smile. "I'll go with you," he said. "Rex too. You won't be alone." The drive to the sheriff's office was quieter than the morning trip. Margaret felt safer, but a new sense of urgency hung in the air. She realized that what had begun as quiet fear was now turning into action steps that could ensure she would never feel this vulnerable again. At the sheriff's office, Margaret provided her account in detail. John and Rex stood nearby, calm and attentive. The sheriff listened carefully, taking notes and asking questions, clearly impressed by Margaret's observations and the clear signal she had sent through her small napkin gesture. "You did the right thing," the sheriff said finally. "Not everyone would have noticed, or had the courage to speak up. Thanks to your report and the assistance of your friends here, we may be able to prevent something serious from happening. Margaret felt a warmth in her chest. For the first time in weeks, she felt that she had power over her situation, not just fear. John squeezed her shoulder gently, and Rex wagged his tail, as if sharing her relief. When they left the sheriff's office, Margaret's steps felt lighter. The shadows that had followed her in recent weeks were beginning to fade, replaced with a sense of protection, trust, and hope. She had learned that help could come from unexpected places, that a quiet gesture could speak louder than words, and that bravery sometimes meant asking for help when you needed it most. As the sun set behind the hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Margaret looked at John and Rex, feeling gratitude that went deeper than words. She had taken the first step in reclaiming her life, and though the journey ahead was still uncertain, she no longer faced it alone. For the first time in a long while, Margaret believed that she could navigate the world without fear. And with John and Rex by her side, she felt ready for whatever challenges might come next. The morning sun had barely risen when Margaret awoke with a sense of unease. Despite the reassurance she felt yesterday, a quiet tension lingered in her chest. The world outside her window seemed calm, but her instincts once dulled by loneliness were now sharper. She moved slowly through her home, brewing a cup of tea, her hands steady but her mind alert. John had arrived earlier, parking his car at a safe distance from her driveway. Rex, always observant, sat at the window, ears alert to every sound: the rustle of leaves, the distant hum of a passing car, even the faint chirping of birds. Margaret had come to trust this silent guardian more than she could express. His presence, combined with John's calm authority, gave her a sense of security that had been absent for weeks. "Good morning," John said softly, stepping into her kitchen. "Sleep well?" His voice was gentle but steady, carrying a tone that made even the smallest fears feel manageable. Margaret managed a small smile. "As well as I could," she admitted. "I keep thinking about yesterday, about that car." John nodded. "We'll make sure you're safe today. I think it's time we take a small step forward." Margaret's heart skipped a beat. "Step forward?" she asked. "Yes," John replied. "It's one thing to stay hidden and hope nothing happens. It's another to take control. We need to confirm if this person is still following you. We'll do it carefully, with a plan. I'll be right there, and Rex will watch out for you." Margaret hesitated, but she understood the importance. Fear had dominated her days, and she knew that avoiding the world completely wasn't a solution. Trusting John and Rex was her first real step toward reclaiming her life. By mid-morning, Margaret was ready. She sat in her car, gripping the steering wheel with quiet determination. John's car followed behind, Rex alert at his side. The first few miles were calm, the roads quiet and lined with fields that stretched endlessly. Birds flitted across the sky, and the occasional car passed by, oblivious to the tension riding in the small convoy. For a while, nothing happened. Margaret allowed herself to breathe a little easier, trying to enjoy the scenery. She had always loved these country roads: the way the sunlight played across the fields, the gentle curve of the roads through the hills, and the quiet that surrounded her. It had been months since she had felt free to notice these small beauties. But then, as if on cue, a dark sedan appeared in the distance behind her car. Its driver was careful, almost calculated, maintaining a distance that made it clear they were not merely passing through. John noticed immediately, his hands gripping the wheel tightly but controlled. Rex's ears twitched, and a low growl escaped his throat, not at Margaret, but at the sense of danger in the air. Margaret's heart thudded in her chest. "They're back," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. John kept his tone calm. "That's okay. Remember the plan. Take the next side road. I'll follow closely, and Rex will keep watch. Nothing is going to happen to you." Her hands gripped the wheel tightly as she turned onto the narrow road, lined with tall trees that created a tunnel of shade over the asphalt. Every rustle of leaves, every shift in light, made her pulse quicken, but John's presence was steady, grounding her. The sedan followed, maintaining a distance but moving with precision. It was clear that whoever was in that car had been tracking her and knew her route. Margaret's breath caught in her throat, but John's steady voice and Rex's alert presence gave her courage. "We're almost at a safe spot," John said, pointing to a small clearing near a creek, partially hidden by bushes. "Pull over there. We'll see if they follow." Margaret obeyed, carefully maneuvering her car into the clearing. The sedan continued down the road, eventually slowing and disappearing from view. Margaret exhaled, a mixture of relief and lingering tension washing over her. "They're cautious," John said thoughtfully. "They know we're aware. But now we know they're still watching. That information is valuable." Margaret nodded, feeling a strange mix of fear and determination. For the first time in weeks, she felt as though she was not just a passive target of someone else's plans, but an active participant in her own safety. They returned to her home slowly, staying alert but calm. John helped her check the doors and windows again, reinforcing locks and suggesting small adjustments that could make her home less noticeable from the street. Margaret listened intently, absorbing every tip. She realized that knowledge and preparation were as powerful as courage. Later, they sat in her living room, sipping tea. The sunlight streamed through the window, casting warm patterns on the floor. Margaret spoke softly, almost to herself. "I never realized how lonely I had become, or how small my world had felt until all this happened." John nodded, understanding. "Fear isolates people," he said. "It makes the world feel smaller than it is. But when you take action, even small steps, you reclaim that world. You're stronger than you think, Margaret." Rex nudged her hand with his nose, and she smiled, feeling a bond not only with the dog but with John as well. Their presence was more than protection, it was companionship, a reassurance that she was no longer facing life alone. As the afternoon progressed, John suggested a small walk in the nearby woods. "We'll stay on the trail, and Rex will lead. Just a short walk, to get used to moving outside without fear." Margaret hesitated, glancing at the path. The woods were beautiful, but her mind quickly pictured the shadow of a stranger following her. Yet, the calm confidence in John's voice and the steady presence of Rex convinced her to try. They moved slowly, Margaret walking between John and Rex, keeping her eyes on the path ahead but aware of her surroundings. The air was fresh, filled with the scent of pine and damp earth. Birds sang high in the trees, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves. For a few minutes, she felt almost at peace, as if the danger of the past weeks had been replaced by a sense of freedom she hadn't realized she missed so much. But peace was fragile. A sudden movement in the distance, too deliberate to be natural, caught John's eye. He signaled for Margaret to stop and crouched slightly, his hand brushing against Rex's back. The dog immediately tensed, his low growl a warning that they were not alone. Margaret's heart raced, but John remained calm. "Stay quiet," he whispered. "Watch carefully." From behind a large tree, a figure emerged briefly, a shadowy outline of a person who had clearly been watching them. John and Rex were ready, but the figure seemed to realize it had been seen and quickly retreated into the trees. Margaret's hands shook, but John placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "It's all right," he said firmly. "We saw them. That's important. Now we know they are watching more closely. We'll report this, and we'll be ready next time." The experience was terrifying, yet strangely empowering for Margaret. Fear still lingered, but she realized that she had allies who would act, who would protect her, and who would help her face danger without panic. It was a lesson she had never needed to learn in her younger years, but now she understood its importance deeply. As they returned home, Margaret felt a strange combination of exhaustion and exhilaration. The day had tested her courage, but she had survived it. With John and Rex by her side, she knew she could handle more than she had ever imagined. That evening, Margaret prepared a small dinner, John helping quietly in the kitchen. They ate together, discussing nothing and everything, sharing stories of their pasts, and finding small moments of laughter amid the tension of the day. Rex lay at their feet, content and alert, completing the sense of safety Margaret had begun to feel. Before heading to bed, Margaret sat by the window, watching the stars appear one by one. Her thoughts drifted to the events of the day: the dark sedan, the brief glimpse of the shadowy figure, the way John and Rex had been by her side. A small smile touched her lips. Fear would always exist, she knew, but courage, vigilance, and companionship could overshadow it. For the first time in weeks, Margaret felt ready for what tomorrow might bring. She had faced danger, even in a small way, and survived it. And more importantly, she had discovered that she was not alone. John and Rex had become her protectors, her friends, and her allies in reclaiming a life that had been shadowed by fear. As she finally turned off the lights and prepared for bed, Margaret whispered softly to herself, "Tomorrow, I will be stronger. Tomorrow, I will not be afraid." And for the first time in a long while, she truly believed it. The days that followed were filled with cautious routines. Margaret began to regain confidence in the simple acts she had once taken for granted: walking to the mailbox, tending her garden, and even taking short trips to the nearby grocery store. She no longer felt invisible, and the presence of John and Rex by her side gave her a strength she had long forgotten. Each morning, John arrived promptly, sometimes with Rex sitting quietly in the car, sometimes walking with Margaret through the small town. Their quiet companionship became a rhythm that Margaret cherished. While John observed the surroundings with careful attention, Rex stayed alert, but always gentle, allowing Margaret to feel safe while slowly rebuilding her courage. One bright morning, John suggested, "Let's take a walk through the park today. Just a small one. Nothing too far." Margaret hesitated. The thought of being in a public place made her stomach tighten. But the memory of the recent events, the dark sedan, the shadowy figure in the woods, also reminded her how much progress she had already made. She nodded slowly. "All right. Let's do it." The park was only a few blocks from her house, but it felt different today. Sunlight streamed through the tall oak trees, the grass glistening with morning dew. Children ran past, laughing and shouting, their joy infectious. Birds sang from the branches above, creating a chorus of life and movement. Margaret felt a strange sense of peace settle over her, a feeling that she hadn't experienced in weeks. John stayed close, his presence steady and reassuring. Rex walked just ahead, sniffing the grass and occasionally turning to make sure Margaret kept pace. "You're doing well," John said softly. "Notice how calm the world can feel when you're ready to see it?" Margaret smiled faintly. "I almost forgot what it felt like to feel normal, or safe," she admitted. John nodded. It's easy to forget. Fear has a way of shrinking the world, of making every sound and shadow seem dangerous. But courage, even in small steps, can expand it again. As they strolled, Margaret shared stories from her past. She spoke of the summers she had spent visiting her grandparents' farm, of the books she had read as a child, and the little adventures she had embarked upon in her youth. John listened attentively, occasionally asking questions that drew out memories and laughter. It was a conversation free of judgment or urgency, a rare and comforting kind of connection. Rex wandered close, nudging Margaret gently when she paused, as if reminding her to enjoy the moment. Margaret laughed quietly. "You're a good companion," she said, scratching behind the dog's ears. Rex responded with a soft bark, his tail wagging slowly. They reached a small bench under a massive oak tree, and John suggested they sit for a while. The park was quiet here, shielded from the main path by shrubs and smaller trees. Margaret sank onto the bench, feeling the warmth of the sun on her face. She realized how much she had missed these small, ordinary moments, the simplicity of being outside, breathing fresh air, and observing life without fear. "I haven't felt this peaceful in a long time," she admitted. "It's comforting to have someone to share it with." John smiled. "You've earned it. You've taken steps many people wouldn't have. And sometimes, having someone by your side makes the world seem less threatening. It's not weakness, it's strength." Margaret looked at him, a question forming in her mind. "John, do you ever get scared?" John's eyes softened. "Of course. Everyone feels fear. But fear is different from danger. Fear warns you, but it doesn't control you. Training, experience, and trust in your companions help you respond, instead of reacting blindly." Margaret thought about Rex, sitting loyally by John's side. She realized that trust wasn't just a human concept, it was a bond between all living things. The dog had chosen John, and by extension, he had chosen to protect her. That quiet loyalty filled her heart with warmth. They stayed on the bench for a while, watching the small world around them. Margaret noticed the children playing, the joggers moving rhythmically along the paths, and the old couple feeding birds near the pond. Life went on, indifferent to the fear and worry that had clouded her recent days. And yet, she was learning to rejoin it, to walk among it without trembling. John suggested they take a slightly longer path on their way back, one that passed near a small cafe and a cluster of shops. Margaret hesitated but nodded. "I'll try," she said. As they walked, Margaret noticed someone standing across the street. It was a man, watching the park from a distance. His stance was casual, but his eyes seemed to follow her. A wave of anxiety swept over her. "John, that man," she whispered. John observed him carefully. "Don't panic," he said. "Keep walking with me. We'll handle this." Rex stiffened, growling low in his throat. The man seemed to notice the dog, and after a moment, he turned and walked away, fading into the crowd. Margaret exhaled, her hands trembling slightly. "Every time I think I'm safe, he's still there," she said. John placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "That's why we stay vigilant. Fear will try to creep back, but trust in your allies can keep it in check. You're not facing this alone, Margaret." The rest of the walk was quiet but calm. Margaret felt her heart gradually slow, the initial panic replaced by determination. She realized that fear was not something she could completely eliminate, but she could learn to face it with help and courage. Back at her home, They settled into a quiet afternoon. Margaret decided to do some gardening, a task she had neglected in recent weeks due to anxiety. John helped by carrying small pots and tools, while Rex lay nearby, occasionally sniffing at the flowers. Margaret found comfort in the routine, the simple repetition of planting and watering, which gave her a sense of control over her environment. Later, Margaret shared more of her life with John, stories she had never told anyone. She spoke of her childhood, of the friends she had lost touch with, and of the dreams she had once held. John listened without judgment, occasionally sharing small stories from his own life, creating a space of mutual respect and trust. Rex, always alert, seemed to understand the importance of these moments. He stayed close, providing a steady presence that reminded Margaret that she was not alone. In his quiet way, the dog became a bridge between her past fears and her growing confidence. As evening approached, the sunlight faded, casting a golden glow over the garden. Margaret sat on her porch, sipping tea, while John reviewed some notes he had taken on the recent events: the sightings, the dark sedan, and the man in the park. He planned to contact the sheriff with detailed information, ensuring that any future encounters could be managed safely. Margaret looked at him, a mix of gratitude and admiration in her eyes. "John, I don't know how to thank you. I've felt so lost, so afraid. And now, I feel like I can breathe again." John smiled softly. "You don't need to thank me. The courage was always in you. I just helped guide it. You've done the hard work by trusting yourself and taking action." Rex barked softly, as if agreeing, and Margaret laughed quietly. For the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of belonging, a connection to the world around her, and to the people who had chosen to stand by her side. That night, Margaret lay in bed, reflecting on the day. The fear that had once consumed her was no longer overwhelming. It was still present, a quiet reminder of reality, but it no longer dictated her life. She had allies, friends, and a sense of strength she hadn't realized she possessed. As she drifted off to sleep, she whispered to herself, "I am not alone. I am not afraid." And for the first time in many weeks, she truly believed it. The next morning, the town seemed unusually calm. The sun rose slowly over the hills, painting the streets with a soft golden light. Margaret stood at her window, watching the quiet world outside. Birds flitted from branch to branch, and the occasional car passed by, but nothing seemed threatening. After days of fear and uncertainty, the peaceful morning felt almost unreal. John arrived as usual, with Rex calmly sitting in the passenger seat. Margaret greeted them with a small smile, a sign of the comfort she had begun to feel. "Good morning," she said. "I think I'm ready for today." John nodded, sensing her determination. "Good. Today, we're going to take steps to make sure you can move freely without worry. The sheriff wants to speak with you again, and we'll provide all the details about the man who's been following you. We'll make sure this is resolved." Margaret felt a mix of relief and nervous anticipation. She had faced fear for days, but today felt different. Today was about taking control, reclaiming her life, and seeing the outcome of the careful vigilance she had maintained with John and Rex. The drive to the sheriff's office was calm. Margaret kept a close eye on the road, while John monitored the surroundings, and Rex remained alert. The dark sedan that had followed her before was nowhere in sight, which allowed Margaret to relax slightly. She realized that for the first time in weeks, she could travel without constant panic. At the sheriff's office, they were greeted warmly. The sheriff, a tall man with a kind face, welcomed Margaret, and asked them to sit. "Thank you for coming in again," he said. "We've received your previous report, and now we want to make sure we have everything clearly documented. This will help us act quickly and effectively." Margaret recounted the events carefully: the dark sedan, the shadowy figure in the park, and her observations of the man who seemed to follow her at various points. John added details: he had noticed the timing of the vehicle, the way it kept a safe distance, and the subtle cues that indicated the person had been deliberately watching Margaret. Rex, though silent, sat attentively beside John, his presence calm but reassuring. The sheriff nodded, clearly impressed. "You did an excellent job," he said. "Most people would have ignored these signs, but your careful attention and willingness to come forward have made our work much easier. We've already tracked the man through nearby surveillance cameras, and our team will ensure he's questioned and prevented from causing further concern." Margaret felt a wave of relief wash over her. For weeks, she had felt trapped by fear, her confidence diminished by uncertainty. Now, she realized that the threat was being addressed by competent authorities and, more importantly, that she had allies she could trust. John gave her a reassuring smile. "See? That's why we stayed vigilant. You didn't have to face this alone." Rex nudged Margaret's hand with his nose, and she laughed softly. "Thank you, both of you," she said. "I couldn't have done it without you." After leaving the sheriff's office, Margaret felt a new sense of freedom. The streets seemed brighter, the world less intimidating. She realized that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to move forward despite it. With John and Rex by her side, she had faced fear head-on and emerged stronger. They decided to stop at the local park again, this time with a different purpose. Margaret wanted to enjoy the simple pleasure of walking without fear, testing her newfound confidence. She moved slowly, letting the sunshine warm her face, listening to the laughter of children, and feeling the gentle breeze on her skin. John walked beside her, offering quiet reassurance, and Rex led the way, alert but calm. As they walked, Margaret noticed familiar faces: the baker from the cafe, a group of elderly neighbors, and a few children waving as they passed. The small town that had once felt oppressive now felt welcoming. Margaret realized that her world had grown larger again, filled with possibilities she had thought lost. John suggested they stop at a small pond near the edge of the park. The water shimmered in the sunlight, reflecting the trees and sky above. Margaret sat on a bench, feeling the peace of the moment settle over her. "I never thought I'd feel like this again," she admitted softly. "I thought fear would always be a part of my life." John sat beside her, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "Fear is always a part of life," he said. "But it doesn't have to control you. Courage, trust, and preparation can make fear manageable. You've learned that, Margaret, and that's something no one can take away from you." Rex sat at their feet, looking up at Margaret with eyes full of loyalty and understanding. The dog had been a constant companion, a silent protector, and a source of comfort. Margaret realized that trust could exist between humans and animals in ways she had never fully appreciated before. As the afternoon progressed, they walked back toward the town. Margaret noticed the sun dipping lower in the sky, casting long, soft shadows over the streets. She felt a lightness in her step, a sense of normalcy returning to her life. When they reached her home, Margaret paused at the doorway, looking back at John and Rex. "I don't know how to ever repay you," she said, her voice filled with genuine gratitude. John shook his head. "You've already done what matters most. You faced fear, you trusted others, and you took steps to protect yourself. That's more than enough. Rex barked softly, as if agreeing, and Margaret laughed quietly. The simple sound of her own laughter, free from tension and fear, filled her with warmth. That evening, Margaret prepared a small dinner. John helped with the dishes, while Rex lay nearby, resting his head on Margaret's feet. The house felt calm, safe, and welcoming. For the first time in weeks, Margaret felt completely at peace in her own home. As night fell, Margaret sat by the window, gazing at the stars. The quiet world outside seemed full of possibilities, each twinkling light a reminder that life continued, even after fear and uncertainty. She reflected on the past days, the dark sedan, the shadowy figure, the tense moments in the park, and the nights of anxiety, and realized how far she had come. She thought of John and Rex, and the quiet bond they had formed. It was more than protection, it was friendship, trust, and shared courage. Margaret felt a deep gratitude that went beyond words. She knew that the world could still be unpredictable, but she also knew she had allies she could depend on. The next morning, Margaret awoke with a sense of calm determination. She made tea and looked out the window, noticing the familiar sights of her neighborhood: the mailbox at the end of the street, the neighbors tending their gardens, the birds flitting from tree to tree. The world seemed safe, not because danger had disappeared, but because she had grown stronger and more aware. John arrived, as always, with Rex quietly sitting in the car. Margaret greeted them with a smile that was full of warmth and confidence. "Good morning," she said. "I feel ready for today." John nodded, smiling. "That's wonderful. Today, you get to live without fear. You've earned it." They decided to take a short drive through town, stopping at the cafe, the library, and the small grocery store. Margaret moved through these familiar spaces with a sense of ease she hadn't felt in weeks. People smiled at her, greeted her warmly, and she realized how much she had missed the sense of community. Rex walked beside her as they entered the cafe. Margaret ordered a small breakfast, enjoying the simple pleasure of being out among people without the constant tension of fear. John observed the surroundings quietly, ensuring her safety without interfering, and Margaret felt a sense of empowerment she hadn't experienced in a long time. After breakfast, they walked through the library, where Margaret had spent countless hours in her youth. She ran her fingers along the spines of books, remembering the joy of discovery and learning. John and Rex followed closely, their presence reassuring but unobtrusive. By the time they returned home, the sun was high in the sky, filling the house with warmth. Margaret felt a lightness in her heart and a clarity in her mind. Fear was no longer the dominant force in her life. She had faced it, navigated it, and learned to live alongside it without letting it control her. As evening approached, Margaret, John, and Rex sat together on the porch. The sky glowed with soft shades of pink and orange, and the world felt quiet, safe, and full of possibility. Margaret took a deep breath, savoring the calm. "I feel free," she said softly. "I haven't felt this way in a long time." John nodded. "You've earned this freedom, Margaret. And you've learned something important: you don't have to face fear alone. Trust, courage, and companionship can help you overcome even the hardest challenges." Rex let out a soft bark, resting his head on Margaret's knee. She laughed quietly, feeling the warmth of friendship, loyalty, and safety. For the first time in weeks, she truly believed that she could live her life without fear controlling her. That night, as Margaret drifted off to sleep, she whispered softly to herself, "I am safe. I am strong. And I am not alone." The quiet confidence in her voice reflected a heart that had faced uncertainty and emerged resilient. In the days that followed, Margaret continued to live her life with new courage. She ventured out more often, enjoyed her garden, and reconnected with neighbors and friends. John and Rex remained close, a steady presence that reminded her that trust and friendship could be as powerful as any shield. Margaret had faced fear, darkness, and uncertainty, but she had emerged stronger, braver, and more aware. The world was still unpredictable, but she had learned to navigate it with confidence and hope. And as she looked out at the world each morning, she knew that no matter what came next, she would face it with courage, with trust, and with the knowledge that she was never truly alone.